Hey guys, what's good? Welcome back to JDB Selects. I'll just address the elephant in the room straight off the bat. My voice is a bit messed up this week. It may or may not be because I was whipping the Warriors home against the Sea Eagles on Friday night and it still hasn't recovered, so just bear with me. Also, sorry for the delay in putting this video out. It may not quite be as in-depth as my normal videos. Had a lot on my plate at the minute, so appreciate all your support and understanding. But I'll put the tiny violin away for just a moment, and before we get stuck into my tips for round 26, let's look back at how we did last week. Last week we tipped 6 out of 8 games. The two teams that had the most to play for I thought would turn up and do that, but unfortunately the Cowboys and the Rabbitohs did not. Those were the two games we missed. Happy to be on the right side of the Tigers game, as I was very annoyed I didn't get their win over the Raiders a couple weeks back. So full credit to the Tigers. Well played, Appy. That kick was sensational. Now, I'm not going to bang on about joining the tipping comp now because we are officially almost done for the year. But looking over the ladder, there hasn't been too much change. Abdullah still holds top spot over Jared 68. It's been pretty steady in the overall ladder for the past couple of weeks. Obviously, the only thing that could shake that up now would be a perfect week in these last two rounds. So good luck to everyone in the tipping comp or just in general with your tips for this week. Let's get stuck into my personal tips for round 26. Alright, round 26 gets underway on Thursday night with the first placed Penrith Panthers taking on the 11th placed Parramatta Eels at Bluebet Stadium in Penrith. Starting first with the Panthers, they all but locked up the minor premiership with a tough 40-14 point win over the Gold Coast Titans. Despite the final 15-minute blowout, the Panthers were forced to work hard with their forward pack doing it tough through the middle, but Edwards and Taruva put the team on their back, combining for over 535 metres with 2 tries and 15 tackle breaks. I don't know if I'm reading into it too much, but it does seem that the Panthers are slowing some very slight chinks in their armour over the past month, but it is hard to see them not pulling off the three-peat, especially given that they have been under strength. They are expected this week to be boosted by the returns of Brian To'o, Scott Sorensen, Mitch Kenny and Isaac Tungo, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they give a few other players a rest too, so keep an eye out for the teams list tonight. And as for the Parramatta Eels, their season is over after suffering a heavy loss at the hands of the Sydney Roosters, 34 points to 12. Losing Moses obviously meant that the responsibility had to fall on Dylan Brown's shoulders, and I thought he looked great in a losing side, running for 163 metres with a try assist, 4 tackle breaks, and only 2 missed tackles, but the Eels clearly missed Moses' long kicking game. It's been a pretty disappointing season for the Eels. Obviously, it's been riddled with injuries and suspension, but they made the grand final last year, so it's a bit of a fall from grace, but they are still a formidable opponent when at full strength. In terms of the Eels lineup, Sean Lane and Andrew Davey are expected to be back on deck this week. Looking at the two sides head to head, the Eels, they've gotten the better of the Panthers earlier this year in a crazy field goal shootout between Cleary and Moses. The Panthers obviously beat the Eels in last year's grand final and have won 6 of the last 9 games. They've also won 3 of the last 4 games against the Eels at Bluebet. Pretty straightforward in terms of tip. I think Panthers 13 plus is probably a lock. It's hard to see the Eels putting up much of a fight without Moses, and given that the Panthers should be at full strength this week, I think it could be a long night for Parramatta. The only thing that might change that is if Penrith decide to rest some players, but I feel like they may wait until next week with the minor premiership wrapped up. So Panthers 13 plus for me. Kicking off the first of 2 Friday fixtures, we have the 3rd placed NZ Warriors taking on the 16th placed St George Illawarra Dragons over here at Go Media Stadium, Auckland. Starting first with the Wars, the Warriors made it 6 on the trot for the first time since 2002 with a 29-22 point win over the Sea Eagles on Friday night. Now keep in mind I was at that game, so my takes may not be as dialed as usual, but I thought the Warriors looked strong through the middle with AFB and Tohu Harris leading the way, but were once again very fragile on their left edge defensively. Jeez, and let's just talk about him. Dalen Watene-Zelezniak, what an absolute freak that man is, bagging yet another hat-trick and catapulting himself to the top of the try scorers table despite having only played 16 games this season. Absolutely incredible. If the Warriors are to make a run deep into the finals this season, they'll desperately need to fix up their handling, as it has started to slide in recent weeks, but I think they'll take a lot more out of gritty wins like that rather than a 30-point demolition at this stage of the season. In terms of teams list, Mitch Barnett is expected back on deck this week, as is Timari Martin, who hasn't played since round 6, but given how well the Warriors have been going without him, it is hard to see where he would slot back in. And as for the Dragons, well, they almost did enough to upset the Melbourne Storm, eventually crumbling under the pressure and coming up short 38 points to 28. The Saints gave it to the Storm for 70 odd minutes, and with Tyrell Sloan coming up with some incredible plays on attack, but looking more like a revolving door on defence at times. Blake Laurie was also outstanding in the middle, but collectively they came up with too many errors at key moments in the second half, and Melbourne made them pay. Ben Hunt unfortunately has had a few tough moments in the last few months. He's obviously clearly struggling with the pressure, but that pressure should be released somewhat this week, with Zach Lomax expected to make the trip across the Tasman alongside Jaden Sullivan. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, they met earlier this year with the Warriors thumping the Dragons 48 points to 18 back in round 17, but the Dragons have actually won 3 of the last 4 games. This will be the first time the Dragons have ventured across the Tasman since 2018, and they haven't won here in Auckland since 2014. Ooh, I'm looking forward to this one. Sold out a week in advance, which is pretty unheard of for Warriors games. So Warriors 13 plus for me. It's a crucial game for them. If they win, they lock up that top 3, top 4 finish. And I think a big win could really do wonders for their confidence after a few close calls. And what better side to do it than against the Dragons? So Wars 13 plus. Moving now to the final game on Friday, we have the 14th placed Dolphins taking on the 9th placed North Queensland Cowboys at Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. Starting first with the Dolphins, they came up just 1 point short of the Tigers, 24 points to 23. The Finns really struggled to slow down the Tigers through the middle and couldn't contain the Tigers' offloads until they went to their bench rotation, with Jared Wallace being the standout. Cody Nikorima was once again impressive on attack and found space on the edges, but they couldn't convert all of their chances and were even luckier that the Tigers also couldn't convert all of theirs. It's been a pretty rough end to their maiden season, especially after their dream start, but you've got to give Wayne Bennett and the entire organisation a huge rap for hanging in there as long as they did, and given all the challenges they've faced. They will be boosted this week by the returns of Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow, Kenny Bromwich and Connolly Lemuelu, and maybe even Ray Stone this week, which should make a big difference. And as for North Queensland, the Cowboys had everything to play for against the Sharks on Thursday night, but with their season on the line, they crumbled under the pressure, getting beaten 32 points to 12. They were in it for the first 20 minutes, with Scott Drinkwater coming up with a brilliant solo effort to get them on the board, but fell apart through the middles with the Sharks bench forwards running riot, earning quick play the balls, with the Cows missing 53 tackles. Townsend unfortunately had a poor night with the boot and couldn't help his side build any pressure, and Tom Dearden hardly fired a shot. It was a really underwhelming performance, especially given what was at stake and the fact that they were at home and coming off a bye, but sometimes the week off can have a negative effect, and it certainly seemed that way. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, there is no head-to-head stats to go on, as this is the first time these two sides have met, but the Cowboys have won 3 of their last 4 games at Suncorp, while the Dolphins have won 2 of their last 3. Ooh, should be a good game this one. I've got Cowboys 1-12. Cowboys have looked a little bit flaky the last couple of weeks, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins sprung an upset here, but the Cowboys do have more to play for, and they have proven that they can score points with ease when they get a roll on, so got to back the Cows here 1-12. Moving now to the first of 3 Super Saturday fixtures, starting first with the 4th placed Melbourne Storm taking on the 9th placed Gold Coast Titans at Amy Park in Melbourne. Starting first with Melbourne, the Storm were given a run for their money by the Dragons, but pulled away late to secure their place in the top 4 for another week with a 38-28 point win. It was a back and forth contest in the first half, but Melbourne were able to fix up their handling in the second stint, edging it out, spearheaded by another brilliant performance from Jerome Hughes and an outstanding cameo from Ali Katoa. Hughes scored the match winner and set up 3 others, while Katoa starred with a try-double and came up with some huge plays, including that massive hit on Ben Hunt in the final minutes. It's so hard to gauge the Storm, right? They are in a way building nicely towards September football, but they have been pretty up and down this year, so it's still really hard to get a read on the Storm. But Craig Bellamy isn't expected to make any changes to the starting 17 this week. And as for the Gold Coast, the Titans couldn't take down the Panthers, but were somewhat competitive, eventually getting blown away late, 40 points to 14. The Gold Coast were right in it up until Aaron Shook with Sinbin just before half-time, allowing the Panthers to pull away. They struggled to find holes in Penrith's line, and that challenge was made even harder when Jaden Campbell left the field with a knee injury, as well as Philip Sum. Despite completing close to 90% with ball in hand, they missed over 50 tackles and couldn't gain any momentum. In terms of injuries, Sammy and Campbell won't be named this week, but Kieran Foran and Jojo Fafita should be available. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Storm have won 8 of the past 9 games against the Titans, with the Gold Coast breaking their drought earlier this season. The Storm have also only lost once to the Titans in Melbourne in almost 12 years, with the Titans only win there coming back in 2014. Man, this is another good game this week. I think the Melbourne do win, so I am going to take the Storm here by 1-12. I think Melbourne will want to avenge their loss earlier this season, but I also do think that the Gold Coast can give them a bit of a run for their money, especially up front. So I am just going to take Melbourne 1-12, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they pour on the points and pull away late. Alright, moving now to the second game on Saturday, we have the 10th placed Sydney Roosters taking on the 17th placed West Tigers at the Allianz Stadium in Sydney. Starting first with the Roosters, they took down the Eels 21 points to 12 and now have won 4 of their last 5 and continued their unlikely push towards the top 8. The Chooks have finally clicked into gear with Tedesco, Manu, Tupou and Suali'i finally playing like the star-studded, tackle-breaking backline they are. Big shifts from Lindsay Collins alongside Luke Keary and Drew Hutchinson, who have both found form, with Keary racking up 3 try assists, 4 line break assists and only missing 1 tackle. It's do or die for the Roosters at this point, but given their recent form, a berth in the top 8 really isn't out of question. Unfortunately for Roosters fans, they will likely line up without James Tedesco this week as he battles to overturn the NRL's 11-day concussion protocol. Jared Waerea-Hargreaves is expected to return this week alongside Egan Butcher. And as for the Tigers, they kicked off Benji Marshall's tenure at the helm with a win and in the process snapped a 10-game, 91-day losing streak with a 24-23 point win over the Dolphins. West were really strong through the middle and rolled through the Finns, but looked fragile on the edges defensively. Laurie, Tupou and Buller were threatening in stages, but the Tigers lacked polish on attack, throwing nearly 30 offloads, desperate to keep the ball alive. Api Coruscant was moved into the halves when Luke Brooks was ruled out, and while Api doesn't have the strongest kicking game, he is so sound on defense and got his side around the park well, before eventually icing the game-winning penalty in the dying stages. In terms of injuries, it sounds like Luke Brooks won't return for the Tigers this year, which means he's played his last game for the club before he joins Manly next season, which is a real shame that he won't get a proper on-field goodbye, considering how loyal he's been to the club over the last 10 years. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Roosters have a ridiculous record over the Tigers, winning 20 of the last 22 games, including 6 straight, and the last time they met, the Roosters smashed them 72 points to 6. Another interesting game, but I do think the Roosters can get it done at home here by 1-12 points. I've obviously been quite high on the Tigers the last couple of weeks, and I do think they're undeserving of their wooden spoon position on the ladder, so I think they can give the Roosters a bit of a run for their money, but given their current form, I think the Chooks can edge it out. Roosters 1-12. And the final game on Saturday has the 6th placed Canberra Raiders hosting the 2nd placed Brisbane Broncos at GIO Stadium in Canberra. Starting first with the Raiders, they kept their top 8 hopes alive with a 36-24 point win over the Bulldogs. Canberra needed to show something after being held tryless against the Melbourne Storm the week prior, and they started strong, but despite having the lion's share of possession, never really pulled away until the final stages. The Raiders actually made more errors than the Dogs and were only helped by the Dogs' inability to make a tackle. Corey Horsburgh and Albert Hopewadi were unable to finish Sunday's game and may be sidelined this week, while Jack Wyden is expected to return, and we may finally see the long-awaited return of Xavier Savage, who has been out of the side with a hamstring injury since round 10. Every game from here on out is now a must-win for Canberra, especially given the negative points differential. And as for the Broncos, they will be fresh off their final bye of the season, but the week prior torched the Eels 54 points to 10. Brisbane put on an absolute clinic of fast-paced attacking footy with Reynolds, Walsh and Mam in full control off the back of huge efforts from Kurt Capewell, Payne Haas and Paddy Carrigan. The Broncos enjoyed nearly 60% of possession and managed to defend their try line for over 60 minutes before finally conceding late. It was yet another super impressive Broncos performance and a far cry from the end of season collapse last year. The big injury news though in this one is that Adam Reynolds won't be available with a calf strain, but they will however be boosted by the returns of Corey Oates, Marty Tapol and Jesse Arthurs. Looking at the two sides head to head, the Raiders have won 3 straight against the Broncos at home and 4 of the last 5 overall. They also snapped the Broncos' unbeaten streak earlier this season in round 6, that was at Suncorp, 20 points to 14. Fairly straightforward one here, but it's hard to say how Brisbane will come off the bye, but I am going to take the Broncos 13+. As the season's gone on, it's seen the team coming off the bye is obviously no longer an easy bet, but I do think Brisbane can and need to click back into gear quickly, and if they do that, they should be far too strong for the Raiders. Moving now to the 2 Sunday fixtures, starting first with the 15th placed Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs taking on the 12th placed Manly Sea Eagles at Accor Stadium in Sydney. Starting first with the Dogs, they had to show more ticker against the Raiders than they did against the Knights, and to their credit they looked better, but it still wasn't enough to secure their 8th win of the season, going down 36 points to 24. Canterbury were right in the game at stages, but silly penalties came back to bite them, and with only one forward crossing the 100 metre mark and nearly 50 missed tackles, it isn't surprising they came up short. Jake Averillo has been one of their best all season, and he looked dangerous again, but needed his teammates to match his effort. The Dogs need to make sure they have a real crack in these last 2 games, as this is probably the strongest lineup they've fielded all season, and it can really help them set up for success in 2024. And as for Manly, the Sea Eagles couldn't keep their season alive, but went down swinging against the Warriors, 29 points to 22. Manly found plenty of opportunities on the right edge in the first 40, with Cherry Evans probing on the edge with Jason Saab burning defenders with his speed and bagging a hat-trick before the break. It was an evenly poised contest with a few tough calls going against both sides at key moments, and the Sea Eagles were clearly missing that punch through the middle with so many first-choice forwards sidelined and couldn't trouble the scorers in the second stanza. Ruben Garrick may be in doubt for this week with that back injury following that controversial contest with Chance Nickel-Klugstad, but they are expecting Brad Parker, Ben Trebojevic, Christian Toipolotu and Cooper Johns to be available this week. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, they met all the way back in round 1 with the Sea Eagles blasting the Dogs 31 points to 6, and the Sea Eagles have won 8 of the last 9 games against the Dogs. Ooh, really tough one to tip, and I'm going to be maybe silly, maybe brave, maybe genius, but I am going to take the Dogs in this one, 1-12. I think Manly might be a bit underdone after having their season subbed out last week, whereas the Dogs have had that feeling for a long time and really need to show something to give them that confidence going into next season. So I really don't know. Manly's missing a lot of middles. The Dogs may be able to capitalize on that. It's more of a vibe tip, so take it or leave it, but I am going to take the Dogs here, 1-12. Right, and the final game on Sunday has the 7th placed Newcastle Knights taking on the 5th placed Cronulla Sharks at McDonald Jones Stadium in Newcastle. Starting first with the Knights, they recorded their 7th straight win, beating a woeful South Sydney side 29 points to 10. Newcastle dominated all key stats and were able to strip the Bunnies on the edges, with Ponga continuing his near career best form. Now, I've personally been pretty slow to jump on the Newcastle hype train, and I don't want to take anything away from their performance, but I do feel they had a lot of things go their own way in that game, but that wouldn't have changed the result, and also stringing together 7 wins in a row isn't a fluke, and they are very well deserving of their potential spot in the finals this season. Jackson Hastings was a late scratching last week, but is expected to be named this week, but obviously his fitness will be monitored throughout the week. And as for the Sharks, they dealt the North Queensland Cowboys finals hope a cruel blow with a dominant 32-12 point win. Cronulla were initially struggling to gain any advantage through the middle until they turned to their bench rotation, who pierced through the Cows line with ease. Hines and Trindle are forming quite the combination, and defensively the Sharks are very much improved. Connor Tracy has also been unbelievable in place of Will Kennedy, and he's made that role his own in such a small amount of time, it's like he's been there all season. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Sharks have won 3 straight against the Knights, while the Knights have won 3 of the last 4 games in Newcastle. Ooh, this is a super tough game to end the round, but I am going to back the Sharks here, 1-12. I feel like Newcastle could have put 40 on Rabbitohs side that was completing at 40%, it wasn't convincing. Full credit to them, whereas I think the Sharks did a number on the Cowboys, who had a lot more to play for, so it's tough. Yeah, Sharks, 1-12. Alright, bang, and just like that, we're done. We managed to make it through. My voice is just hanging in there, so apologies again for the croakiness, the slurred words, the rest of it, the shorter video. I can't help it. But in summary, I am taking the Panthers and Warriors 13+, the Cowboys, Storm and Roosters 1-12, Broncos 13+, and the Dogs and Sharks 1-12. Thank you as always for watching. I appreciate all the love and support. Let me know who you're tipping in the comments below. Leave a like on the video, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next week for the final tipping round of the season.